My sister Carmen stole $67,000 from my wedding savings to fund her tech startup. I only found out when her business partner Derek called me at 2 a.m., drunk and crying, telling me the company was about to collapse and asking if I knew where Carmen really got the seed money. What happened next destroyed our family forever. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. 3 years ago, I started saving for my dream wedding. My fiancé, Marcus, and I had been together since college, and we wanted something special. Not over the top, but meaningful. We set a budget of $75,000 and opened a joint savings account that we both contributed to religiously. Every month, $2,200 went in like clockwork. Marcus worked double shifts at the hospital as a nurse, and I picked up freelance graphic design projects on weekends. We were disciplined about it. My sister Carmen knew about our wedding fund. She'd always been the entrepreneurial type, the one who sold friendship bracelets in middle school and started a dog walking service in high school. After graduating from UC Berkeley with a computer science degree, she bounced between tech jobs in San Francisco, never quite finding her niche. She was smart, ambitious, but also impulsive in ways that worried our parents. In January of last year, Carmen came to me with this incredible energy I hadn't seen in years. She'd met this guy Derek Walsh at a tech meetup, and they had this brilliant idea for an app that would revolutionize how restaurants manage their supply chains. She talked about algorithms and predictive analytics and showed me these impressive mock-ups on her laptop. The passion in her voice was infectious. Carmen explained that they needed $85,000 in seed funding to get the prototype built and hire a small development team. She'd already put in $18,000 of her own savings, and Derek had contributed $25,000. They were so close to having everything they needed. She'd applied for small business loans, pitched to a few angel investors, even started a crowdfunding campaign, but nothing was panning out fast enough. That's when she asked if I could co-sign on a business loan for her. She promised it would be completely separate from my money, just my signature and credit score to help her get approved. Carmen had always been responsible with money growing up, never asking our parents for handouts like some of our cousins did. She showed me the business plan, introduced me to Derek over video call, and even offered to give me 5% equity in the company as a thank you. I said no, not because I didn't believe in her, but because Marcus and I had already committed every dollar we could spare to the wedding. We'd booked the venue, put deposits down with vendors, and our families were already making travel arrangements. I felt terrible about it, especially seeing how disappointed she looked. But I explained that we simply couldn't take on any financial risk right now. Carmen said she understood completely. She hugged me and told me she was proud of how disciplined I'd become with money. She even joked that she'd dance extra hard at our wedding to make sure we got our money's worth. Over the next few months, Carmen's startup seemed to be taking off. She'd post photos on Instagram from coffee meetings with potential investors, screenshots of their app development progress, even pictures from a small tech conference where they had a booth. She moved into a nicer apartment in Oakland and started talking about hiring their first full-time employee. I was genuinely happy for her success, though I'll admit there was a tiny part of me that wondered if I'd missed out on a great investment opportunity. Marcus and I were still grinding away, saving every penny. We'd even started eating ramen for lunch most days to squeeze out an extra $50 here and there for the wedding fund. The first red flag came in June. Carmen called me, sounding stressed, asking if I remembered exactly how much Marcus and I had saved so far. It seemed like an odd question, but she explained that Derek was putting together some financial projections and wanted to use us as an example of how regular people budget for major life events. She said it would help them pitch their restaurant app to investors by showing they understood consumer spending patterns. I told her we were up to about $63,000 at that point. She seemed surprised it was so much and asked a bunch of follow-up questions about our bank, whether we kept it all in one account, stuff like that. I didn't think much of it at the time. The second red flag was more obvious. In August, our bank sent us a notice about some unusual account activity and recommended we review our recent statements. When I logged into our online banking, I saw a series of transfers I didn't recognize. Small amounts at first, $500 here, $800 there, but they added up to almost $3,000 over 6 weeks. Marcus and I both swore we hadn't made those transfers. We called the bank immediately, thinking someone had hacked our account. The fraud department asked us to come in and file a report. That's when we discovered something that made my blood run cold. The transfers were authorized using my login credentials from my laptop's IP address on dates when I was definitely at home. The bank's security team pulled up detailed logs showing that someone had accessed our account multiple times using my exact username and password. But it wasn't just random guessing. Whoever did this knew intimate details about our finances, including the exact amounts of our regular deposits and the account balance history. Marcus looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before. Not accusatory, but confused and hurt. The bank investigator explained that in cases like this, it was usually someone close to the account holders who had observed them entering their login information or had been told the passwords directly. Racked my brain trying to figure out who could have gotten access to my banking details. I'd never written down my password anywhere, never logged in from a public computer, never even told Marcus what it was. But then I remembered, Carmen had been at our apartment several times over the past few months, usually when I was working on design projects at my kitchen table laptop. The possibility that my own sister might have stolen from us felt so absurd, I almost laughed. But the more I thought about it, the more certain details started clicking into place. How Carmen always seemed to position herself behind me when I was on my computer. How she'd asked such specific questions about our savings amount and bank. How her startup had suddenly gotten funded right around the same time our mysterious account activity began. I decided to check our account balance in detail for the first time in weeks. What I found made me physically sick. Our wedding fund, which should have been sitting at around $67,000, was down to $11,000. Someone had been systematically draining our account for months, taking amounts small enough that we wouldn't notice in our day-to-day spending, but large enough to devastate our total savings. Over $56,000 was gone. 3 years of sacrifices, double shifts, ramen lunches, and skipped dinners out. The deposits. For our venue, our photographer, our catering, everything was supposed to come from that account in the next few months. Marcus sat down heavily on our couch and put his head in his hands. We'd have to cancel the wedding. There was no way we could come up with that much money again before our planned date in December. All our vendors required final payments 6 weeks in advance, and we were already past that deadline for several of them. But I still couldn't bring myself to believe Carmen had done this to us. There had to be another explanation. Maybe someone had stolen her laptop and seen our information there. Maybe Derek had somehow gotten access to her computer and our details. Maybe it was an elaborate identity theft scheme that just happened to target us. I called Carmen that night, trying to keep my voice steady. I told her about the missing money and asked if she'd noticed anything suspicious lately, anyone who might have had access to information about our finances. She sounded shocked and sympathetic, immediately offering to help us figure out what had happened. Carmen suggested we meet the next day to go through everything together. She said Derek was really good with cybersecurity and might be able to help trace where the money had gone. Her concern seemed so genuine that I felt guilty for even considering she might be involved. We met at a coffee shop near her apartment in Oakland. Carmen brought Derek along, and he seemed genuinely eager to help. He asked technical questions about our computer security, whether we'd clicked any suspicious links lately, if we'd given our information to any new websites or services. But then Derek mentioned something that stopped me cold. He was explaining how sophisticated hackers could sometimes watch people enter passwords from across a room, and he said, Like if someone was looking over your shoulder while you were banking at home, they could probably figure out your login pretty easily. Carmen shot him a look that lasted maybe half a second, but I caught it. It was sharp, almost warning. Derek seemed to realize he'd said something wrong because he immediately started talking about other potential security vulnerabilities. That look between them told me everything I needed to know. My sister had stolen our wedding fund, and her business partner knew about it. I excused myself to go to the bathroom, but instead I stepped outside and called Marcus. My hands were shaking as I dialed his number. "She did it," I whispered into the phone. "Carmen stole our money." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Are you sure?" I told him about the look between Carmen and Derek, about Derek's comment that felt too specific to be coincidental. Marcus listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he said something that surprised me. "I've been wondering about her for weeks, Ayla. Remember when she came over last month to help you move your desk? She spent a lot of time in the kitchen while you were in the shower. I thought it was weird that she was just standing there with your laptop open." My stomach dropped. I'd forgotten about that day completely. Carmen had offered to help me rearrange my home office, and I'd jumped in the shower afterward because I was covered in dust. She'd said she was just checking her email while she waited. I went back inside, and Derek was showing Carmen something on his phone. They both looked up when I sat down, and Carmen smiled that same warm smile she'd given me our entire lives. But now it felt like a mask. "So Derek thinks you might have a keylogger on your computer," Carmen said. "That's probably how someone got your banking information. We should run a full system scan when you get home." I nodded and played along, but I was studying both of their faces. Derek seemed genuinely concerned about helping us, which made me think Carmen hadn't told him where the money really came from. Maybe she'd lied to him too. Over the next hour, they gave me a list of cybersecurity steps to take and promised to ask around their tech network to see if anyone had heard about similar scams. Carmen hugged me goodbye and told me everything would work out. She even offered to lend us some money if we needed help covering immediate wedding expenses. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The audacity of that offer made me want to scream. I drove home in a daze. Marcus was waiting in our living room with his laptop open, surrounded by printed bank statements. He'd been going through everything with a forensic level of detail. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a timeline he'd created. The first transfer happened 3 days after Carmen visited in March. Then there's a gap of 2 weeks, and the amounts get bigger. But here's the interesting part. Every single theft happened on days when you posted something on social media about working from home. He was right. Carmen followed me on Instagram, and I'd posted plenty of photos of my coffee cup next to my laptop with captions like, "Another day at the home office," or "Freelance grind never stops." She was tracking when you'd be home alone with access to your computer, Marcus continued. "And look at this. The transfers always happen between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., which is exactly when you usually work on design projects. We spent the evening building a case against my own sister. It felt surreal and heartbreaking at the same time. Every piece of evidence pointed to Carmen, but part of me still hoped we were wrong. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about all the times Carmen had seemed genuinely excited about our wedding plans, how she'd helped me research vendors, and even offered to make custom invitations. Had all of that been fake? Was she planning this theft even while she was helping me plan the event she was essentially stealing from? The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Derek directly. "Hey Derek, it's Ayla. I wanted to thank you for helping yesterday, and I had a quick question about the keylogger thing." Derek sounded happy to hear from me. "Of course. Did you find anything when you scanned your computer?" "Actually, that's what I wanted to ask about. When you mentioned someone watching over your shoulder to get passwords, that seemed really specific. Have you seen that happen before?" There was a pause. Well, not exactly seen it. But Carmen mentioned that's probably what happened to you guys. She said someone must have watched you type your password when you didn't realize it. My heart started racing. Carmen said that? When? Oh, back when she first told me about your situation. She was really upset about it. Said she felt terrible that someone had targeted her sister like that. When did she first tell you about our money being stolen, Derek? Another pause. Longer this time. I think maybe 2 weeks ago? She was worried about you guys having to cancel the wedding. 2 weeks ago. But Marcus and I had only discovered the theft 3 days ago. Derek, I said carefully, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. How long? Have you known that someone stole our wedding fund? The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Finally, Derek said, Ayla, I think we need to talk, but not over the phone. We agreed to meet at a different coffee shop, one across town where Carmen wouldn't accidentally run into us. I told Marcus where I was going, and he offered to come, with me, but I needed to do this alone. Derek was already there when I arrived, looking uncomfortable and fidgety. He'd ordered 2 coffees and pushed one toward me as I sat down. Before I say anything, Derek began, I want you to know that I never wanted any part of this. I didn't know the truth until it was too late to stop it. He took a shaky breath and continued. Carmen told me she'd gotten a family loan for her share of our startup funding. She said her sister, you, had extra money saved up and was happy to invest in the company. She showed me bank transfers as proof that the money was coming from your account willingly. I felt like I was going to be sick. What do you mean, bank transfers? Carmen showed me screenshots of money moving from an account with your name on it into her account. She said you were being generous but wanted to keep the investment quiet until after your wedding, so other family members wouldn't ask for money too. Derek pulled out his phone and showed me the screenshots Carmen had sent him. They were real images of our bank transfers, but presented in a way that made it look like I was voluntarily sending her money. She'd even cropped out the account balance information so Derek wouldn't see how much we had lost. I thought it was a little weird that you never mentioned the investment when we met, Derek said. But Carmen said you were private about money stuff and didn't like talking business at family gatherings. The level of manipulation was staggering. Carmen hadn't just stolen our money. She'd created an entire false narrative to cover her tracks and make Derek complicit without him realizing it. Derek, I never gave Carmen permission to take our money. She stole it. Every single transfer was theft. His face went white. Oh my God, Ayla, I am so sorry. I had no idea. If I'd known. Derek started talking rapidly, explaining how the business had been struggling despite Carmen's optimism. The app development was behind schedule. They'd burned through most of their initial funding, and their lead developer had quit last month. The company was essentially worthless at this point. That's not even the worst part, Derek said. Carmen's been talking about raising another round of funding. She wanted to ask you for more money, another $30,000. She said since the first investment had gone so well, you might be interested in doubling down. I stared at him in disbelief. Carmen was planning to steal even more from us. There's something else, Derek said quietly. I think Carmen might have done this before. She mentioned having investors in Seattle, but when I asked for their contact information so we could update them on our progress, she said they preferred to stay anonymous. And her rent is way higher than what our company pays her. I always wondered how she could afford that apartment. The picture Derek was painting was of someone who had turned theft into a business model. Carmen wasn't just my sister who had made a desperate mistake. She was a serial scammer who had been systematically stealing money and lying about it for months. Derek promised to help me gather evidence against Carmen, including all their business communications and financial records. He also agreed to confront her with my present, but he wanted to do it in a way that wouldn't tip her off that we knew the full extent of her lies. As I drove home, I realized that my relationship with Carmen was over. Even if she somehow paid back every penny, I would never be able to trust her again. She hadn't just stolen our money, she'd stolen our future, our wedding, and our peace of mind. But more than that, she'd stolen my ability to believe in family. Derek and I spent the next 2 days putting together a comprehensive file of evidence. He forwarded me every email, text message, and financial document related to their startup. What I found was even worse than I'd imagined. Carmen had been lying to Derek about almost everything. The app they'd supposedly been developing, the screenshots, she'd shown me were actually mock-ups she'd downloaded from a design template site. The tech conference where they'd had a booth, Derek had paid for it, but Carmen had pocketed the registration fee and told him the event was canceled last minute. Most damning was a series of text messages between Carmen and someone named Jake Morrison, dated from 3 months ago. In them, Carmen bragged about having another funding source lined up and mentioned she'd learned the family approach works better than targeting strangers. Jake seemed to be coaching her on financial scams. He suggested she keep the amount small and irregular and always have a legitimate story ready. In one message, Carmen told him she'd made $23,000 so far and was planning to tap the same well again soon. My sister wasn't just a thief. She was part of some kind of organized fraud network. Derek was devastated when I showed him these messages. He'd put his entire life savings into what he thought was a legitimate business partnership. Carmen had stolen from him too, just in a different way. I need to confront her, I told Derek, but I want you there as a witness. Are you sure that's a good idea? Maybe we should just go to the police first. I'd thought about that, but I needed to hear Carmen admit what she'd done. I needed to understand how someone I'd loved and trusted, my entire life, could betray me so completely. The police could wait another day. We arranged to meet Carmen at her apartment under the pretense of discussing a new marketing strategy for the startup. Derek texted her that I'd had some ideas after talking to Marcus about the restaurant industry. Carmen's apartment was exactly what Derek had described, way too expensive for someone living off a failed startup. The building had a doorman, granite countertops, and floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the Bay Bridge. This wasn't the home of someone struggling to make ends meet. Carmen greeted us with her usual enthusiasm, offering wine and asking about Marcus's work at the hospital. She seemed genuinely happy to see me, which made what I was about to do even harder. "So what are these brilliant marketing ideas?" Carmen asked, settling onto her expensive leather couch. I pulled out my phone and opened the bank statements Marcus and I had compiled. "Actually, Carmen, I want to talk about these transfers first." Her smile faltered slightly. "What transfers?" "The ones from my wedding fund to your account. The $67,000 you stole from us over the past 8 months. The room went completely silent. Carmen looked at Derek, then back at me, and I watched her mentally calculating how to respond. "Ayla, I have no idea what you're talking about. Are you accusing me of stealing from you?" "I'm not accusing you. I know you did it. Derek knows too." Carmen's gaze snapped to Derek, and the mask finally slipped. For just a moment, I saw something cold and calculating in her eyes that I'd never seen before. "Derek, what is she talking about? You know the money came from Ayla's investment in our company." Derek looked miserable but held his ground. "Carmen, she never invested in our company. You stole the money from her wedding fund and lied to me about it." Carmen stood up abruptly. "This is insane. Ayla, I can't believe you'd accuse me of something like this. And Derek, I'm disappointed that you'd take her side without even hearing my explanation." "Then explain," I said. "Explain how you knew our money was missing 2 weeks before we discovered it. Explain how you accessed my bank account. Explain these text messages with Jake Morrison." I showed her the screenshot of her conversation about targeting family members. Carmen's face went pale as she read her own words. "Where did you get this? This is private communication that you have no right to access." Derek forwarded it to me. "Along with all the other evidence of your lies." Carmen turned to Derek with genuine anger now. "You gave her my personal messages? You violated my privacy and our business partnership? Our business partnership was built on fraud, Derek shot back. There is no app, Carmen. There never was. You've been scamming everyone, including me. For a moment, Carmen looked like she might try to keep lying. Then something shifted in her posture, and she sat back down with a sigh. Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I took the money. But it wasn't stealing, Ayla. It was a loan. I was going to pay you back with interest once the company took off. A loan requires permission, Carmen. You stole our wedding fund and lied about it for months. Your wedding fund? Carmen laughed, but it sounded bitter. Ayla, you have no idea how easy your life is. You and Marcus, with your stable jobs and your perfect relationship and your dream wedding. Do you know what it's like watching everyone around you succeed while you can't even get a call back for a job interview? I stared at my sister in disbelief. So you decided to steal from us? That was your solution? I decided to take an opportunity that presented itself. You left your laptop open, your banking information accessible. If you were really worried about security, you would have been more careful. The victim blaming was stunning. Carmen was actually trying to make this my fault. Derek looked sick. Carmen, you told me Ayla gave you that money willingly. You showed me fake evidence and made me complicit in theft. I could go to jail for this. Nobody's going to jail, Derek. It's a family matter. Ayla isn't going to press charges against her own sister. She said it with such confidence that I almost believed her for a second. This was the same tone she'd used when we were kids, and she'd talked her way out of trouble with our parents. The same charm that had convinced Derek to trust her with his life savings. But I wasn't a kid anymore, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate me. You're wrong, Carmen. I'm filing a police report tomorrow morning, and Derek is going to tell them everything he knows about your operation with Jake Morrison and whoever else you're working with. Carmen's confident mask cracked completely. Ayla, please. I'm your sister. We can work this out between us. I'll pay you back. I promise. Just give me 6 months to figure something out. With what money? Your startup is fake. Your app doesn't exist. You've been living off stolen funds for months. I can get a job. I can sell the car. Downsize the apartment. Please don't destroy my life over this. For a moment, looking at Carmen begging on her couch, I almost felt sorry for her. She looked young and scared, like the little sister who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Then I remembered Marcus's face when he realized we'd have to cancel our wedding. I remembered the months of ramen lunches and double shifts we'd worked to save that money. I remembered the trust she'd shattered and the lies she'd told. You destroyed your own life, Carmen. And you tried to destroy ours too. I stood up to leave, and Carmen grabbed my arm. What about our family? What about Mom and Dad? This will kill them. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you became a criminal. Derek followed me to the door. Carmen was still sitting on her couch, staring at her hands. As we walked to the elevator, Derek said, I'm going to the police with you tomorrow, and I'm going to help them find Jake Morrison and anyone else involved in this. I nodded. Thank you. For everything. I'm sorry I didn't figure it out sooner. I feel like an idiot. She fooled all of us. That's what makes her dangerous. The elevator doors closed, and I realized I might never see my sister again. Not the real Carmen, anyway. The person I'd grown up with, who I'd trusted and loved, was gone. In her place was a stranger who saw family as an opportunity for exploitation. But as devastating as that realization was, I also felt something unexpected. Relief. The mystery was solved, the truth was out, and now Marcus and I could start figuring out how to move forward. The Oakland Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit was located in a gray building that looked like every government office I'd ever been in. Detective Sarah Chen met us in a sterile interview room with fluorescent lighting and the faint smell of burnt coffee. Derek had brought 2 boxes of evidence, printed emails, bank records, business documents, and his laptop with the original files. I had our bank statements and the timeline Marcus had created showing Carmen's theft pattern. Detective Chen was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s. with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She listened to our story without interrupting, taking notes in a precise handwriting that reminded me of my high school math teacher. "This level of sophistication suggests your sister has done this before," Detective Chen said after we'd finished. "The systematic approach, the manipulation of multiple victims, the network connection with this Jake Morrison person, these aren't amateur mistakes." She explained that financial crimes involving family members were often the hardest to prosecute because victims frequently refused to testify against relatives. But our case was different, because Carmen had also defrauded Derek, making this a pattern rather than an isolated incident. "We'll need to freeze her accounts immediately," Detective Chen continued. "If she realizes you filed a report, she might try to move any remaining funds offshore or withdraw everything in cash." That afternoon, while Detective Chen was getting warrants, I had to make the phone call I'd been dreading most. I needed to tell our parents what Carmen had done. My mother answered on the second ring, sounding cheerful. "Ayla, how's the wedding? Planning going? Only 3 months left." The irony of her question made my stomach clench. "Mom, I need to tell you something about Carmen. Can you put Dad on speaker?" The shift in her tone was immediate. "What's wrong? Is she hurt?" "No, Mom. She's not hurt, but she's in serious trouble." I explained everything as gently as I could, but there was no way to soften the reality of what Carmen had done. My parents listened in stunned silence as I detailed the theft, the lies, and the criminal network she'd been part of. When I finished, my father was the first to speak. "Ayla, are you absolutely certain about this? This doesn't sound like the Carmen we raised." "Dad, I have bank records, text messages, witness testimony from Derek, and Carmen admitted it to our faces yesterday." My mother started crying. "How much did she take?" $67,000 from our wedding fund, plus whatever she stole, from Derek and probably other people we don't know about yet." The silence stretched on until my father cleared his throat. "What happens now? Legally, I mean." "She'll be arrested, probably sometime this week. The detective said she'll likely face multiple felony charges for theft, fraud, and identity theft. She could go to prison for years." My mother's crying got louder. "This will destroy her future. No one will ever hire her with a criminal record. Maybe we could pay you back ourselves, and you could drop the charges?" I'd expected this reaction, but it still hurt. "Mom, Carmen didn't just steal from us once. She's been running scams for months, maybe longer. She's part of a criminal network. This isn't a mistake we can fix with family money."
"But she's your sister," my mother pleaded. "Family forgives family. Family doesn't steal from family in the first place." My father sighed heavily. "Your mother's right that this will follow Carmen forever. But Ayla's right, too. What Carmen did was unforgivable. I don't understand how we got here." Neither did I. Growing up, Carmen had been the golden child. Straight A's, class president, full scholarship to UC Berkeley. Our parents had always held her up as an example for me to follow. The idea that she'd become a criminal was incomprehensible to all of us. After I hung up, Marcus found me crying in our kitchen. He held me while I sobbed, mourning not just the money or the wedding, but the loss of my family as I'd known it. "My parents want me to drop the charges," I told him. "They think I should protect Carmen because we're family." "What do you want to do?" "I want my sister back. I want none of this to have happened. But I also know Carmen isn't going to stop unless someone stops her." Marcus kissed the top of my head. "Then we see this through, whatever happens." 2 days later, Detective Chen called with an update. They'd arrested Carmen at her apartment and found evidence of an even larger operation than we'd suspected. Her laptop contained contact information for dozens of potential victims, detailed financial profiles, and correspondence with at least 5 other people involved in various fraud schemes. "Jake Morrison is actually Jacob Morrison Hughes," Detective Chen explained. "He's been running romance scams and investment fraud for 3 years. Your sister was one of his newest recruits, but she was learning fast. We found evidence that she was planning to expand beyond family victims to target elderly people through fake charity scams. The scope of Carmen's criminal activity was staggering. She hadn't just stolen from me in a moment of desperation. She'd been building a career as a professional scammer. Detective Chen also had news about our money. We were able to freeze about $31,000 in her accounts before she could access it. The rest appears to have been spent on living expenses and payments to her criminal associates. Recovery will depend on what assets we can seize and whether the other defendants have any recoverable funds. $31,000. Less than half of what she'd stolen, and far less than what we needed to salvage our December wedding. That evening, Marcus and I sat down with our laptops and started canceling vendors. The venue was understanding when I explained our situation. They'd dealt with financial emergencies before. Our photographer agreed to reschedule to the following year for a partial refund. The caterer was less sympathetic, but agreed to release us from our contract for a cancellation fee. By the time we finished, we'd recovered about $18,000 in deposits and vendor refunds. Combined with the $11,000 still in our account and the $31,000 the police had frozen, we might have enough for a small ceremony sometime next year. "I'm sorry," I told Marcus as we closed our laptops. "I'm sorry my sister destroyed our wedding." "Carmen destroyed our wedding," Marcus corrected. "You didn't do anything wrong." "I should have been more careful with my passwords. I should have noticed the theft sooner. I should have—" "Stop." Marcus took my hands. "Carmen is a trained criminal who specifically targeted us because she knew our routines and had access to our home. This isn't your fault." 3 weeks later, Carmen's case made the local news. The headline read, "Oakland woman charged in multi-victim fraud scheme stole wedding fund from sister." The article mentioned that she was being held on $250,000 bail and faced up to 15 years in prison if convicted on all charges. My mother called me crying after she saw the news story. "Everyone in our neighborhood knows now. The Patels next door asked if we needed help with legal fees. I didn't know what to say." "Tell them the truth, Mom. Carmen chose this path. She wants to see you. She's been asking every day if you'll visit her in jail." I've been expecting this request, but I still wasn't ready for it. Part of me wanted to see Carmen, to try to understand how she'd become someone I didn't recognize. But another part of me knew that seeing her would only make this harder. I need more time to think about it. She says she wants to apologize, to explain everything. Carmen had plenty of chances to apologize before she got arrested. She chose to keep lying until the very end. My mother sighed. "I just keep thinking about when you two were little. Remember how Carmen used to share her Halloween candy with you every year? She gave you all the good pieces and kept the hard candies for herself." I remembered. I also remembered that Carmen had been stealing pieces of my candy earlier in the evening, so sharing hers was really just giving me back what was already mine. Even as a kid, she'd been manipulative in ways I hadn't recognized at the time. "Mom, the Carmen who shared Halloween candy doesn't exist anymore. Maybe she never did. The person in jail is someone who saw our family as an opportunity for profit." But even as I said it, I wondered if I was being too harsh. Was there any part of my real sister left underneath all the lies and manipulation? And if there was, did I owe it to our shared childhood to try to find her? Those questions would haunt me for months to come. 6 weeks after Carmen's arrest, Derek called me with news that changed everything. He'd been cooperating with the FBI. Apparently, Carmen's fraud network had crossed state lines, making it a federal case. They found something, Isla. Something big. We met at the same coffee shop where he'd first told me the truth about Carmen's lies. This time, Derek brought an FBI agent named Rodriguez, who looked like he'd stepped out of a crime drama. Dark suit, serious expression, and a briefcase full of documents. "Ms. Lopez, we've been tracking Jacob Morrison Hughes' operation for 18 months, Agent Rodriguez explained. Your sister's case helped us crack open a network that's stolen over $2 million from victims across 7 states. He spread photos across the table, dozens of faces I didn't recognize, ranging from college students to elderly retirees. These are just the victims we've identified so far. Carmen was recruiting new operators and teaching them her family targeting techniques. The photos made my stomach turn. Carmen hadn't just stolen from us. She'd been teaching others how to destroy families the way she'd destroyed ours. Here's where it gets interesting, Agent Rodriguez continued. Carmen wasn't just learning from Morrison Hughes, she was innovating. The family approach, the long-term relationship exploitation, the social media reconnaissance, that was all her contribution to the operation. Derek looked sick. You're saying she was like a criminal mastermind? I'm saying she was very good at what she did, and she was ambitious. We found evidence that she was planning to franchise her methods to operators in other cities. Agent Rodriguez pulled out a thick folder labeled with Carmen's name. Ms. Lopez, I need to ask you something difficult. Would you be willing to testify in federal court about what your sister did to you? The request caught me off guard. I'd already given statements to the local police, but federal testimony would be different, more public, more permanent. What happens if I say no? We have enough evidence to prosecute the network without your testimony. But your case is particularly compelling because it shows Morrison Hughes' operation expanding into family fraud. It would help us put him away for longer. I told Agent Rodriguez I needed time to think about it. The idea of testifying against Carmen in federal court felt like a final, irrevocable step toward destroying what was left of our relationship. That weekend, Marcus and I drove to Santa Barbara to see my Aunt Lisa, my mother's sister who'd always been the family truth teller. If anyone could help me figure out the right thing to do, it was her. Aunt Lisa lived in a small beach house that smelled like salt air and lavender. She made us coffee and listened to the entire story without interruption. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time, staring out at the ocean. You know, she finally said, Carmen called me 3 months ago, asking for money. Marcus and I exchanged glances. She did? Said she needed help with rent because her startup was having cash flow problems. I wanted to borrow $15,000. I told her no, not because I don't love her, but because something felt off about the whole conversation. Aunt Lisa walked to her kitchen and returned with a notebook. I actually wrote down what she said because it bothered me so much. She mentioned that you were loaded with wedding money and suggested I should ask you to help her instead. Reading Aunt Lisa's notes, I realized Carmen had been surveying our entire family for potential targets. She'd approached our aunt as a backup plan, and when that failed, she'd moved on to directly stealing from us. The Carmen I remember from childhood was competitive, but this goes beyond competition, Aunt Lisa continued. This is sociopathic behavior, Ayla. She's not the little girl who shared Halloween candy anymore. Mom keeps saying family should forgive family. Your mother is in denial. She's choosing to see Carmen as a victim of circumstance rather than accepting that her daughter became a predator. That harsh word, predator, hung in the air between us. But it fit. Carmen had stalked us, studied our patterns, exploited our trust, and fed on our vulnerabilities. I think you should testify, Aunt Lisa said. Not for revenge, but to prevent her from doing this to other families. Right now, Carmen thinks she can manipulate her way out of consequences, like she always has. Federal prison might be the only thing that stops her. The drive home gave me time to process Aunt Lisa's words. Marcus held my hand while I stared out the window at the California coastline, thinking about the choice ahead of me. 2 days later, I called Agent Rodriguez and agreed to testify. He scheduled me for a preparation session the following week where I'd learn about federal court procedures and review the evidence they planned to present. That's when I learned something that shattered the last piece of sympathy I had for Carmen. Agent Rodriguez showed me transcripts of recorded phone calls between Carmen and Morrison Hughes from prison. In them, Carmen wasn't expressing remorse or regret. She was angry that she'd gotten caught and was strategizing about how to rebuild her operation after her release. The family thing was working perfectly, Carmen said in one recorded conversation. I should have started smaller, maybe taken just 30 grand from Ayla instead of going for the whole fund. Greed got me caught. In another call, she talked about me directly. My sister's such a control freak about money anyway. She probably would have wasted that cash on some ridiculous wedding flowers. At least I was putting it to good use. Marcus read over my shoulder and shook his head. She's not sorry at all. She's just sorry she got caught. Agent Rodriguez had saved the worst for last. Ms. Lopez, there's something else you need to know. Carmen has been trying to reach out to other potential victims while in custody. We intercepted letters she was sending to your cousins in Phoenix, asking them to visit her. She claimed she had important family information to share with them. Carmen was still actively trying to scam our relatives from jail. Even facing federal charges, she couldn't stop herself from looking for new marks. That night, my mother called with another update from Carmen's lawyer. She wants to accept a plea deal, 24 months in federal prison plus restitution. Her attorney says it's a good offer. What does that mean for the money she stole? The restitution would be paid back over 5 years after her release, about $800 a month. I did the math. At that rate, assuming Carmen actually made the payments, we'd get our money back when I was 33 years old, 6 years after our planned wedding date. The lawyer also mentioned that if you don't testify at the federal trial, it might help Carmen get an even shorter sentence. There it was, the emotional manipulation I'd been expecting. Carmen was using our mother to pressure me into protecting her, even after everything she'd done. Mom, Carmen is going to prison whether I testify or not. The only question is how long she stays there and whether she learns anything from the experience. She says she's learned her lesson already. She's been taking online business courses and reading self-help books about making better choices. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Carmen was studying business courses in jail, probably to become a better criminal when she got out. I'm testifying, Mom. Carmen needs to face real consequences for what she did, not just to us, but to all her other victims. My mother started crying again. This is tearing our family apart. Carmen tore our family apart when she decided to become a criminal. I'm just refusing to let her get away with it. After I hung up, Marcus found me sitting on our couch with Carmen's old photo albums spread around me. Pictures of us as kids, family vacations, high school graduation, Christmas mornings. Looking for clues? He asked gently. Looking for the moment she changed, or maybe looking for proof that she was always like this, and I just didn't want to see it. Marcus sat beside me and picked up a photo of Carmen and me building a sandcastle at the beach. We couldn't have been more than 6 and 8 years old, both grinning at the camera with gap-toothed smiles. Maybe it doesn't matter when she changes, he said. What matters is who she is now and what you're going to do about it. He was right. The Carmen in these photos was gone, if she'd ever really existed at all. The person facing federal fraud charges was someone else entirely, someone dangerous enough that the FBI considered her a key figure in a multi-state criminal enterprise. I closed the photo albums and made my final decision. I was going to testify, and I was going to make sure Carmen faced the full consequences of her choices. Not for revenge, but for justice. And maybe, if I was lucky, for closure. The federal courthouse in San Francisco was an imposing building with marble columns and security checkpoints that reminded me of an airport. I'd never been inside a courtroom before, and the formality of it all made my hands shake as Agent Rodriguez walked me through what would happen during my testimony. Remember, just tell the truth, he said. Don't embellish, don't speculate. Stick to what you personally experienced and witnessed. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected from watching TV shows, but it felt enormous when I walked in and saw Carmen sitting at the defendant's table. She'd lost weight in prison and was wearing an ill-fitting Navy suit that made her look younger and more vulnerable than the criminal mastermind the FBI had described. Our eyes met for a split second, and I saw something I hadn't expected: genuine fear. Not the manipulative performance she'd given at her apartment, but real terror about what was happening to her life. For a moment, my resolve wavered. This was still my sister, the person who'd taught me how to ride a bike and helped me with algebra homework. Was I really going to be the one to put the final nail in her coffin? Then I remembered the recorded phone calls where she'd laughed about stealing from me and called me a control freak. I remembered Derek's devastated expression when he realized how thoroughly she'd used him. I remembered the photos of all her other victims. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, was a sharp woman in her 40s who treated the case with the seriousness it deserved. She walked me through my testimony methodically. how Carmen had gained access to my banking information, the pattern of thefts, the discovery process, and the confrontation at her apartment. Ms. Lopez, in your own words, how did it feel when you realized your sister had stolen your wedding fund? Devastating, I said, looking directly at the jury, not just because of the money, but because of the betrayal. She'd been in our home, helping us plan our wedding, all while secretly stealing from us. She turned our trust into a weapon against us. Carmen's defense attorney, a public defender named Michael Torres, tried to paint her as a victim of Morrison Hughes's manipulation, a naive young woman who'd gotten in over her head with an experienced criminal. During cross-examination, he asked me about Carmen's childhood, her academic achievements, and whether I believed she was capable of the sophisticated fraud the prosecution described. Mr. Torres, 3 months ago, I would have said no, Carmen wasn't capable of this, but the evidence doesn't lie. She didn't just steal from us once in a moment of desperation. She systematically studied our routines, accessed our accounts repeatedly over 8 months, and created elaborate lies to cover her tracks. That level of planning doesn't happen by accident. The hardest part came when Torres asked me about my family relationships. Ms. Lopez, isn't it true that your parents have asked you not to testify against your sister? Yes. And isn't it true that testifying here today could permanently damage your relationship with your family? Yes, it could. So why are you here? Why are you choosing to potentially destroy your family rather than show mercy to your sister? I took a deep breath and looked at Carmen again. She was crying now, but I couldn't tell if the tears were genuine or another performance. I'm here because Carmen didn't just hurt me and my fiancé. She hurt Derek, who trusted her with his knife savings. She hurt elderly people through romance scams. She hurt families across 7 states. If I don't testify, if I let her manipulation work one more time, she'll hurt more people when she gets out. I can't live with that. Torres tried a few more questions designed to make me seem vindictive, but I held my ground. I wasn't there for revenge. I was there to make sure Carmen faced real consequences for the first time in her life. After my testimony, I sat in the gallery and listened to Derek's account of how Carmen had deceived him. He was followed by Morrison Hughes's other victims, a retired teacher from Oregon who'd lost her pension savings, a single mother from Nevada who'd been convinced to invest in fake cryptocurrency, an elderly couple from Arizona who'd given Morrison Hughes access to their entire retirement fund. The scope of the damage was staggering. Dozens of lives ruined by sophisticated lies and emotional manipulation. Carmen had been part of an operation that didn't just steal money, it destroyed people's ability to trust others. The trial lasted 3 days. During breaks, my parents sat on the opposite side of the courtroom from me, making their allegiance clear. My mother wouldn't even look at me, while my father just seemed defeated and old. On the final day, Carmen took the stand in her own defense. This was the moment I'd both dreading and anticipating. Would she finally tell the truth about what she'd done?
Her testimony was a masterclass in deflection and self-pity. She admitted to taking our money, but claimed she'd been coerced by Morrison Hughes, who she said had threatened to hurt our family if she didn't participate in the fraud scheme. She said she'd planned to pay us back as soon as the fake startup became profitable, never intending for us to actually lose anything. "I love my sister more than anything in the world," Carmen said, crying into a tissue. "I would never intentionally hurt her. I thought I was protecting our whole family by going along with Jake's plan." It was a compelling performance, and I could see some jury members softening toward her. But then, the prosecutor played the recorded phone calls from prison, Carmen laughing about my ridiculous wedding flowers and strategizing about how to avoid getting caught next time. The contrast between her tearful testimony and her callous recorded words was devastating. Even her defense attorney looked like he wanted to disappear. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman read the verdict: guilty on all counts of mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Carmen's face crumpled as the judge scheduled sentencing for the following month. Morrison Hughes received 12 years in federal prison. Carmen, as a first-time offender who'd cooperated with investigators, got 4 years plus 5 years of probation. She'd also have to pay full restitution to all victims, which would likely take decades given the amount of money involved. After the sentencing, I stood outside the courthouse feeling empty rather than vindicated. Justice had been served, but it didn't bring back our wedding fund or repair our family relationships. Derek approached me on the courthouse steps. He'd received a 3-year suspended sentence in exchange for his cooperation and testimony. "I'm moving back to Portland," he told me, "starting over completely. New job, new friends, new everything. I can't stay in the Bay Area with all these reminders." I understood. Even though Derek had been a victim too, he'd have to live with the knowledge that his naivety had made him complicit in Carmen's crimes. Marcus picked me up from the courthouse, and we drove home in silence. That evening, we finally had the conversation we'd been avoiding for months. "So what now?" Marcus asked. "Do we try to plan another wedding, or do we just go to City Hall?" I'd been thinking about this question throughout the trial. Our original wedding vision had been tied to the money Carmen stole, but it had also been tied to a version of our family that no longer existed. "I want to get married," I said, "but I want it to be about us, not about proving we can recover from what Carmen did. Something small and meaningful, with people who actually love and support us." We decided on a simple ceremony in Aunt Lisa's backyard in Santa Barbara. Just Marcus's immediate family, Aunt Lisa, and a few close friends. No formal reception, no elaborate flowers, no expensive photographer. Just vows, rings, and the people who mattered most. The wedding took place on a sunny Saturday in November, exactly 1 month after Carmen began serving her sentence. As I walked down an aisle made of beach sand and wildflowers, I realized something important. Carmen had stolen our money and damaged our family, but she hadn't stolen our love or our future. My parents didn't attend. They'd chosen to stand by Carmen even after her conviction, viewing my testimony as an unforgivable betrayal. It hurt, but I'd made peace with their decision. During our vows, Marcus promised to protect our family from anyone who might try to harm us, including relatives who saw our trust as weakness. I promised to choose truth over comfort, even when the truth was painful. As we exchanged rings, I thought about Carmen sitting in federal prison, probably still believing she was the victim in all of this. She'd lost everything, her freedom, her family, her future, but she'd never understand that she'd done it to herself. After the ceremony, Aunt Lisa raised a toast to Ayla and Marcus, who built something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. The settlement money from Carmen's conviction eventually came to about 40 cents on the dollar. We used it for a down payment on a small house, choosing to invest in our future rather than dwelling on what we'd lost. 6 months later, I received a letter from Carmen in prison. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was 3 pages of self-justification and blame. She was sorry I'd chosen to destroy our family. Sorry I couldn't understand the pressure she'd been under. Sorry that my vindictive testimony had ruined her life. There was no genuine remorse, no acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused, no real apology for what she'd done. Even facing 4 years in federal prison, Carmen couldn't take responsibility for her choices. I burned the letter in our fireplace and never wrote back. Sometimes I wonder if Carmen will emerge from prison genuinely changed, ready to rebuild her life honestly. But mostly, I think she'll just get better at not getting caught. The sister I grew up with is gone. In her place is someone dangerous, someone who sees family as a target rather than a sanctuary. And while that loss still hurts, I've learned to grieve the person she used to be while protecting myself from the person she became. Our story didn't end with justice or reconciliation or a restored family. It ended with acceptance, accepting that some betrayals are too deep to forgive, some relationships too toxic to preserve, and some people too damaged to trust again. But it also ended with hope. Marcus and I built a new life on the foundation of honesty Carmen tried to destroy. We learned that real love survives even the deepest betrayals, and that sometimes losing toxic family members makes room for healthier relationships to flourish.
Carmen may have stolen our wedding fund, but she couldn't steal our future. In the end, that's the victory that mattered most. 2 years had passed since Carmen's sentencing when the first unexpected call came. I was at work, reviewing designs for a tech startup's rebrand campaign, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Lopez, this is Officer Patricia Nguyen from San Quentin State Prison. I'm calling about your sister, Carmen Rodriguez Lopez. My blood went cold. Is she hurt? No, ma'am. She's fine physically, but there's been an incident involving another inmate that requires family notification. Carmen was caught running an investment scam inside the prison, targeting other inmates' families during visitation calls. Even behind bars, Carmen couldn't stop herself from finding new victims to exploit. She'd convinced 3 families to send money for a fake legal defense fund, claiming their loved ones could get early release if they contributed to a class action lawsuit against the prison system. She's been placed in solitary confinement and will face additional charges, Officer Nguyen continued. Her parole eligibility has been pushed back by 18 months. I thanked Officer Nguyen and hung up, feeling a familiar mixture of disgust and sad inevitability. Marcus found me staring out our kitchen window when he got home from his shift at the hospital. Carmen? He asked, reading my expression. I told him about the prison scam, and he shook his head with the same weary resignation I felt. She really can't help herself, can she? Apparently not. Even in prison, surrounded by other criminals, she found a way to be the predator instead of the prey. That evening brought another surprise, a knock at our door from Detective Chen, the Oakland officer who'd originally investigated Carmen's theft of our wedding fund. She looked uncomfortable as she accepted our invitation to sit in our living room. I have some difficult news, Detective Chen began. We've been contacted by law enforcement in Seattle, Portland, and Phoenix. Carmen's fraud network was apparently much larger than we initially realized, and they've been tracking additional victims for the past 2 years. She opened a file folder and spread out photographs and documents across our coffee table. They found evidence that Carmen had been operating for at least 3 years before she targeted you, using different identities and methods in each city. The photos showed driver's licenses and social media profiles for someone who looked exactly like Carmen but went by different names: Maria Santos in Seattle, Carolina Valdez in Portland, Camila Rodriguez in Phoenix. Each identity came with fabricated background stories, fake references, and carefully constructed social media histories going back years. How is this possible? Marcus asked. Wouldn't someone have caught on? Detective Chen pulled out another document, a detailed timeline of Carmen's movements over 5 years. She was extremely sophisticated about it. She'd establish an identity in a city, build relationships and trust over months, execute her scams, then disappear before anyone realized what had happened. She'd wait at least a year before returning to the same area under a different name. The Seattle victims included a family she'd convinced to invest in a fake renewable energy startup. In Portland, she posed as a graduate student researching family financial planning and persuaded multiple households to give her access to their bank information for her supposed thesis. In Phoenix, she'd run a fake charity for veterans, collecting thousands of dollars that went straight into her personal accounts. The total damage across all jurisdictions is now estimated at over $400,000, Detective Chen said. Carmen wasn't just part of Morrison Hughes' network, she was running parallel operations using techniques she'd developed independently. I felt sick looking at the evidence of Carmen's extensive criminal career. This wasn't someone who'd made a desperate mistake or gotten in over her head. This was a professional scammer who'd been perfecting her craft for years before she ever targeted our family. There's something else, Detective Chen continued. The Phoenix police found correspondence between Carmen and someone claiming to be planning similar operations in Dallas and Miami. We think she was building a network of her own, teaching other people how to run family targeting scams. Marcus leaned back in his chair, looking stunned. She was franchising fraud techniques? That's exactly what she was doing, teaching people how to identify vulnerable families, build trust over time, and execute thefts that would be hard to trace or prosecute. Detective Chen explained that the additional charges from multiple states meant Carmen would likely face federal racketeering charges when her current sentence ended. Instead of getting out in 2 more years, she could be looking at another decade in prison.
We'll need you to review some of these materials and see if anything looks familiar from your own experience with Carmen, Detective Chen said. The prosecutors want to establish a pattern of behavior that goes back as far as possible.
After Detective Chen left, Marcus and I sat in our living room surrounded by evidence of my sister's secret life as a career criminal. The scope of her deception was breathtaking, not just the financial crimes, but the elaborate false identities, the years of planning, the systematic way she'd built and exploited trust. "Do you think she was ever real?" Marcus asked quietly. "The Carmen we knew growing up, was any of that genuine?" I'd been wondering the same thing. Looking at the fake IDs and fabricated social media profiles, I realized Carmen had been practicing identity manipulation her entire adult life. How could I trust any of my childhood memories when she'd become such an expert at being whoever people needed her to be? The next morning brought a call from my mother, our first conversation in over a year. Her voice sounded older, more fragile than I remembered. "Ayla, I need to talk to you about Carmen. The police came to our house yesterday." "I know, Mom. Detective Chen briefed us on the additional charges." "Did you know about all of this when you testified against her? Did you know she'd been doing these things to other families?" The question caught me off guard. "No, Mom. When I testified, I thought she'd stolen from us and Derek, and that was it. I had no idea about Seattle or Portland or Phoenix." My mother was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been so angry at you for testifying against your sister. Your father and I, we blamed you for tearing the family apart." "I know. But seeing all this evidence, learning about these other victims, I think I need to apologize to you. Carmen isn't who we thought she was." It wasn't the full reconciliation I'd hoped for, but it was a start. My mother admitted that she and my father had been receiving collect calls from Carmen every week, and that Carmen had been asking them to send money for commissary items and legal fees. "She told us she was innocent, that you'd misunderstood what happened with your wedding fund," my mother continued. "She said Morris and Hughes had forced her to participate, and that she'd been planning to pay you back all along." "Do you believe her now?" "I don't know what to believe anymore. My daughter has been lying to me for years, apparently to everyone. I feel like I don't know her at all." That admission, that my mother was finally seeing Carmen clearly, felt more significant than any apology. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like we might eventually find our way back to each other. 3 weeks later, I received another unexpected visitor, Derek Walsh. He was standing at our front door looking healthier than the last time I'd seen him, wearing a Portland Trailblazers jacket and a genuine smile. "I was in town for work and wanted to stop by," he said. "I hope that's okay." Derek had indeed moved to Portland and started over. He found work at a nonprofit organization focused on elder fraud prevention, using his experience as one of Carmen's victims to help educate people about financial scams. "It's been therapeutic," he explained, as we sat in our backyard with coffee. "Taking something horrible that happened to me and using it to protect other people from the same experience." He told us about his work developing educational materials for seniors and their families, teaching them how to recognize the warning signs of fraud and manipulation. The nonprofit had already helped prevent dozens of scams and recovered money for several victims. "I've been following Carmen's case," Derek said. "The additional charges from the other states, that's going to put her away for a long time. How do you feel about that?" Derek considered the question carefully. 2 years ago, I would have said I felt sorry for her, but learning about all the other victims, seeing how sophisticated and deliberate her crimes were, I think the world is safer with her in prison. He pulled out his phone and showed us photos from a recent speaking engagement at a retirement community in Oregon. "Last month, I helped an elderly couple realize their grandson's new girlfriend was trying to scam them. She was using almost exactly the same techniques Carmen used on me: the fake startup, the emotional manipulation, the urgency to invest quickly." Derek's transformation from victim to advocate was inspiring. He'd taken the worst experience of his life and turned it into a mission to protect others.
It made me wonder if there was something similar I could be doing with my own experience. 6 months later, that wondering turned into action. I was contacted by a documentary filmmaker named Sarah Kim, who was working on a project about family fraud and financial abuse. She'd learned about our case through court records and wanted to interview me about the experience. Family fraud is one of the fastest growing categories of financial crime, Sarah explained during our initial phone call, but it's also the least reported because victims are ashamed and family members pressure them not to cooperate with law enforcement. The documentary would follow several families who'd been targeted by relatives, exploring the unique psychological damage of financial betrayal by people you love and trust. Sarah wanted to show how these crimes affect not just bank accounts, but entire family structures and relationships. I was hesitant at first. The idea of having our story broadcast to strangers felt invasive, but Marcus encouraged me to consider it, pointing out that our experience might help other families recognize the warning signs or feel less alone in their own situations. Carmen targeted us because she knew we'd be reluctant to report her, Marcus said. She counted on family loyalty to protect her from consequences. If more people understand how these scams work, maybe fewer families will fall victim to them. I agreed to participate in the documentary, but on one condition. Sarah had to include information about resources for fraud victims. I didn't want our story to just be entertainment. I wanted it to actually help people. The filming process was emotionally difficult, but ultimately cathartic. Sarah interviewed me, Marcus, Derek, Detective Chen, and Agent Rodriguez. She even got permission to interview some of Carmen's other victims, painting a comprehensive picture of how family fraud works and why it's so devastating. The documentary, titled Blood Money: When Family Becomes the Enemy, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and was later picked up by Netflix.
Overwhelming. Hundreds of people reached out through social media to share their own stories of financial betrayal by relatives. Many of the messages were heartbreaking. Adult children who'd stolen their parents' retirement savings, siblings who'd forged documents to take control of family businesses, spouses who'd run up secret debts and destroyed their family's financial stability. But there were also messages of hope and healing. People who'd found the courage to report fraudulent relatives after watching our story. Families who'd implemented better financial safeguards to protect themselves. Law enforcement officers who'd used the documentary as a training tool for investigating family fraud cases. One message particularly stood out. It was from a woman in Tennessee whose brother had been running investment scams targeting their extended family. She'd been afraid to speak up because she didn't want to destroy family relationships, but after watching the documentary, she'd reported him to the FBI. Your story showed me that protecting my family means stopping my brother, not protecting him, she wrote. Thank you for helping me find the courage to do the right thing. Reading messages like that one, I realized Marcus had been right. Sharing our story publicly wasn't just therapeutic for me. It was genuinely helping other people navigate similar situations. The documentary also had an unexpected consequence. It caught Carmen's attention in prison. 3 days after the Netflix release, I received a letter from her, the first communication we'd had since the unrepentant note she'd sent right after her conviction. This letter was different. It was shorter, less manipulative, and for the first time, it contained what seemed like genuine remorse. Ayla, it began, I watched your documentary on the prison TV, and I finally understand what I did to you and Marcus. Seeing you talk about how my betrayal felt, hearing Derek describe how I manipulated him, watching Mom cry about losing both her daughters, it made me realize how much damage I've caused. Carmen wrote about the additional charges from the other states and how facing decades more in prison had forced her to confront the reality of her choices. She'd been attending therapy sessions and participating in a prison program for white-collar criminals, trying to understand how she'd become someone capable of such systematic deception. I know I can't undo what I did, the letter continued. I know saying I'm sorry doesn't give you back your wedding or repair our family, but I want you to know that I finally understand why you testified against me. You were protecting other people from someone dangerous, and that person was me. She ended the letter by asking me not to respond,
She said she understood that contact with me would probably be harmful for both of us. She just wanted me to know that she was finally taking responsibility for her actions and trying to become someone different. I read the letter twice, looking for signs of the manipulation and self-pity that had characterized all her previous communications. But this one felt different, more honest, more accepting of responsibility. Marcus found me in our kitchen, holding the letter and crying. "Is it real?" he asked after reading it. "Or is this just another manipulation?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe it doesn't matter. Whether she's genuinely changed or just gotten better at seeming remorseful, she's going to be in prison for the next 15 years. Our lives have moved on." And they had moved on. Marcus and I had bought a house, adopted a rescue dog named Charlie, and started talking about having children. I'd launched my own graphic design consulting firm, specializing in nonprofits and social justice organizations. We'd built a life based on honesty, trust, and mutual support. Everything Carmen's betrayal had tried to destroy. My parents and I had slowly rebuilt our relationship, though it would never be the same as before. They'd finally stopped sending money to Carmen and had begun attending family therapy to process their own feelings of guilt and betrayal. My mother admitted that she'd always known something was off about Carmen's various business ventures, but had chosen to ignore the warning signs because she wanted to believe in her daughter's success. Aunt Lisa had become a central figure in our rebuilt family structure, hosting holidays and family gatherings at her Santa Barbara house. She'd also become something of a family fraud prevention expert, helping other relatives recognize and avoid financial scams. The documentary continued to generate responses for months after its release. Sarah Kim and I started getting invited to speak at conferences about financial crime and family abuse. Law enforcement agencies began using our case as a training example for investigators learning to handle family fraud cases. One speaking engagement particularly stood out. It was at a conference for fraud investigators in Las Vegas, and the audience included FBI agents, local police detectives, and financial crime specialists from across the country. After my presentation, a detective from Miami approached me with a familiar-looking file folder. "Ms. Lopez, I think your sister may have been operating in South Florida under the name Christina Rivera," he said, showing me photographs and documents. "We've been tracking a series of family investment scams that match her methods exactly, but we could never identify the perpetrator."
Overwhelming. Hundreds of people reached out through social media to share their own stories of financial betrayal by relatives. Many of the messages were heartbreaking. Adult children who'd stolen their parents' retirement savings, siblings who'd forged documents to take control of family businesses, spouses who'd run up secret debts and destroyed their family's financial stability. But there were also messages of hope and healing. People who'd found the courage to report fraudulent relatives after watching our story. Families who'd implemented better financial safeguards to protect themselves. Law enforcement officers who'd used the documentary as a training tool for investigating family fraud cases. One message particularly stood out. It was from a woman in Tennessee whose brother had been running investment scams targeting their extended family. She'd been afraid to speak up because she didn't want to destroy family relationships, but after watching the documentary, she'd reported him to the FBI. "Your story showed me that protecting my family means stopping my brother, not protecting him," she wrote. "Thank you for helping me find the courage to do the right thing." Reading messages like that one, I realized Marcus had been right. Sharing our story publicly wasn't just therapeutic for me, it was genuinely helping other people navigate similar situations. The documentary also had an unexpected consequence. It caught Carmen's attention in prison. 3 days after the Netflix release, I received a letter from her, the first communication we'd had since the unrepentant note she'd sent right after her conviction. This letter was different. It was shorter, less manipulative, and for the first time, it contained what seemed like genuine remorse. "Ayla," it began, "I watched your documentary on the prison TV, and I finally understand what I did to you and Marcus. Seeing you talk about how my betrayal felt, hearing Derek describe how I manipulated him, watching Mom cry about losing both her daughters, it made me realize how much damage I've caused.
Carmen wrote about the additional charges from the other states and how facing decades more in prison had forced her to confront the reality of her choices. She'd been attending therapy sessions and participating in a prison program for white-collar criminals, trying to understand how she'd become someone capable of such systematic deception. "I know I can't undo what I did," the letter continued. "I know saying I'm sorry doesn't give you back your wedding or repair our family. But I want you to know that I finally understand why you testified against me. You were protecting other people from someone dangerous, and that person was me." She ended the letter by asking me not to respond. She said she understood that contact with me would probably be harmful for both of us. She just wanted me to know that she was finally taking responsibility for her actions and trying to become someone different. I read the letter twice, looking for signs of the manipulation and self-pity that had characterized all her previous communications. But this one felt different, more honest, more accepting of responsibility. Marcus found me in our kitchen, holding the letter and crying. "Is it real?" he asked after reading it. "Or is this just another manipulation?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe it doesn't matter. Whether she's genuinely changed or just gotten better at seeming remorseful, she's going to be in prison for the next 15 years. Our lives have moved on." And they had moved on. Marcus and I had bought a house, adopted a rescue dog named Charlie, and started talking about having children. I'd launched my own graphic design consulting firm, specializing in nonprofits and social justice organizations. We'd built a life based on honesty, trust, and mutual support. Everything Carmen's betrayal had tried to destroy. My parents and I had slowly rebuilt our relationship, though it would never be the same as before. They'd finally stopped sending money to Carmen and had begun attending family therapy to process their own feelings of guilt and betrayal. My mother admitted that she'd always known something was off about Carmen's various business ventures, but had chosen to ignore the warning signs because she wanted to believe in her daughter's success. Aunt Lisa had become a central figure in our rebuilt family structure, hosting holidays and family gatherings at her Santa Barbara house. She'd also become something of a family fraud prevention expert, helping other relatives recognize and avoid financial scams. The documentary continued to generate responses for months after its release. Sarah Kim and I started getting invited to speak at conferences about financial crime and family abuse. Law enforcement agencies began using our case as a training example for investigators learning to handle family fraud cases. One speaking engagement particularly stood out. It was at a conference for fraud investigators in Las Vegas, and the audience included FBI agents, local police detectives, and financial crime specialists from across the country. After my presentation, a detective from Miami approached me with a familiar-looking file folder. "Miss Lopez, I think your sister may have been operating in South Florida under the name Christina Rivera," he said, showing me photographs and documents. "We've been tracking a series of family investment scams that match her methods exactly, but we could never identify the perpetrator."
The evidence was compelling. The same techniques, the same targeting of close-knit families, even some of the same fake business concepts Carmen had used in other cities. If it was her, it meant her criminal career had been even more extensive than anyone realized. "These crimes happened 3 years before she targeted your wedding fund," the detective explained. "If we can connect them to Carmen, it would add another 5 years to her sentence and provide closure for 6 more families." I agreed to review the Miami evidence and help investigators determine if it was Carmen's work. The process took several months, but eventually, handwriting analysis and other forensic evidence confirmed the connection. Carmen had been running scams across the entire southeastern United States years before she'd ever approached Morrison Hughes. By the time all investigations were complete, Carmen was facing charges in 8 different states and 2 federal jurisdictions. Her total sentence, including the additional time for the prison scam, came to 23 years in federal prison. She wouldn't be eligible for parole until she was in her 50s. The finality of that sentence felt like closing a book that had been open for far too long. Carmen would spend the prime years of her adult life in prison, paying for the systematic way she'd destroyed families and violated trust. It wasn't justice in the sense of restoring what we'd lost, but it was accountability. 5 years after Carmen's original conviction, Marcus and I were finally able to hold the wedding we'd originally planned.
We'd saved up enough money to recreate many of the elements Carmen's theft had forced us to cancel: the venue, the photographer, even some of the more elaborate flowers I'd dreamed about. But the guest list was different. Instead of the large family celebration we'd originally envisioned, we invited only the people who'd stood by us during the darkest period of our lives. Derek flew down from Portland. Aunt Lisa hosted the rehearsal dinner. My parents attended, though the relationships were still fragile and required careful navigation. During the ceremony, I thought about how much we'd all changed since that first devastating discovery of the missing money. Marcus and I had learned that love could survive even the deepest betrayals. Derek had transformed from victim to advocate. My parents had confronted uncomfortable truths about their daughter and their own willingness to ignore warning signs. Even Carmen, in her own way, seemed to be changing. Her letters from prison had become more reflective and less manipulative over time. She'd completed her GED, started working toward a bachelor's degree in psychology, and become involved in prison programs focused on rehabilitation rather than just punishment. I didn't know if her transformation was genuine or if she was simply adapting to her circumstances, but I'd made peace with not needing to know. Carmen's journey toward redemption, if it was real, would have to happen without my participation. The sister I'd grown up with was gone, and I'd learned to grieve that loss while protecting myself from further harm. As Marcus and I exchanged vows for the second time, this time surrounded by people who truly loved and supported us, I realized that Carmen's betrayal had taught us something valuable about the nature of family. A real family isn't defined by blood or shared history. It's defined by loyalty, honesty, and the willingness to protect each other from harm. Carmen had forfeited her place in our family when she chose to see us as opportunities rather than people to cherish. But in losing her, we'd gained a deeper appreciation for the relationships that remained. We'd learned to value trust as the precious, fragile thing it actually is, rather than taking it for granted. The reception was smaller than our original plan, but more meaningful in every way that mattered. As we danced to our wedding song, the same one we'd chosen years earlier, I felt grateful for everything we'd survived and everything we'd built from the ashes of betrayal. Carmen's story wasn't over, and neither was ours, but they were separate stories now, following different paths toward different endings. She would spend the next 2 decades paying for her choices, while we would spend them building the life she'd tried to steal from us. In the end, that felt like the truest form of justice. Not revenge or punishment, but the simple act of refusing to let someone else's darkness extinguish your light. Carmen had stolen our money and damaged our family, but she couldn't steal our future or our capacity for happiness. We'd taken those back ourselves, one honest choice at a time. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.